Yeah. You're going to love this throughout the whole road trip series. Pastor Emmanuel is going to take us through that. And if you like today's video, you can join Emmanuel on Instagram at Outbound Escobar. And he has a great series on learning to surf struggles. So you would enjoy that as well. We're in this series starting today called Road Trip. And I was thinking back at what was one of my most fun road trip experiences when I was a kid. And I remember I used to love going to my grandparents who lived in Cordele, Georgia. And they owned a farm. And as a kid, I used to love it because we would go, you could feed the cows, you could pick vegetables, you could shoot BB guns. Like, you can't do that just while walking around your neighborhood, but I mean, you could do it in the country. And I remember my aunt and uncle owned a country store. So every time we went there, we got free candy. It was awesome. And so I'd even get the chance sometimes to sit in my grandfather's lap when I was a kid and kind of like steer the truck or drive a tractor, which was super fun for a kid growing up. And so one year, some of our best friends who lived out in California at the time drove all the way to Jacksonville and in their camper. And I had never been in a camper before. And so we had finished dinner the first night they were there, and our dads said, hey, let's take a road trip. Let's go to Cordele. And so that night, y'all, we were getting ready to go to bed. We thought it was the coolest thing. We're getting ready to go to bed, and our parents say, let's get in the camper and go on a road trip. And so that's what we did. In the middle of the night, we just drove there. We had an amazing time on the farm. And so we love this whole theme of road trip because who doesn't like to take a good road trip? And they're filled with all sorts of adventures and fun. And we hope that you'll take some trips this summer. I mean, summer's great for going out, vacationing, having some time away. Hope you get some rest and relaxation. But a part of this whole road trip is this sense that while we might take a break for a time to go with our family or friends somewhere, we don't take a break from our journey of faith. And so we're going to be journeying through two books of the Bible, the book of Daniel in the Old Testament and the book of Ephesians in the New Testament. So we want to encourage you, you can bring your Bibles, read your scriptures as we go through the week and as we walk through these two books together. Also, before I forget, this week is Kids Camp. So, hey, I want just to invite you to pray for Kids Camp. We have over 500 children, 200 volunteers for an amazing week. And I remember when I was a kid growing up and going to Kids Camp, different vacation Bible school camps, like I wasn't like a church goer when I was growing up, but my parents used to always send us to random vacation Bible schools at all the different churches. I don't know if it was like free childcare or what, but I wound up in all these different churches, and they always rolled out the red carpet. They treated me like I was one of their own children, and I hope and pray that's the way a lot of kids experience that this week. We have kids from Beach, but also kids from the community. And it's going to be a great time. And so pray that God does some amazing things in the hearts and lives of our children, our volunteers, and all these families who have entrusted their kids to our care. So let's pray as we get into today's message. God, thank you so much. Thank you for your love. Thank you for the opportunity to come together for worship, to be encouraged in our faith, to be strengthened by your word. We thank you for all of these children and families and volunteers that will be a part of this amazing week of Kids Camp. We pray, God, that the seeds of the gospel would be planted in the hearts and lives of children, teenagers, and adults. And God, you would do an amazing work in and through us and in the lives of these children. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So today, we're in the book of Daniel. Over 2,500 years ago, there was a young man and his friends. Actually, they were probably just teenagers whose lives were thrown into complete turmoil and chaos overnight. Taken to a land where it was anticipated that they would lose their identity. Taken to a place where everyone thought they would just become another statistic in the land of Babylon. They had every reason to succumb to the hand that had been dealt them. They had every reason to become a sad statistic, to become the lost boys of Babylon. And yet, 2,500 years later, we're still telling their story of how God used these young teenage boys over the course of decades to impact an entire nation, to become world changers. So here's how the story begins. It was in approximately 605 BC that one of the strongest kings in all of the world, whose name was Nebuchadnezzar, marched on the city of Jerusalem and captured it. He went into the temple, which was kind of like their church. He went into the temple and he took items from the temple in order to take back to his temple in Babylon. Now that doesn't seem like that big a deal to us, but that was a huge slap in the face. That was total humiliation. Because you see, in our day, if someone comes in and takes a mic stand or a light, we might think, oh man, that costs a lot of money. We're going to have to replace that. That was not what this was. This was like in the temple in Jerusalem, everything had a purpose and a place in the temple. Every cup, every plate, every piece of furniture, all was sacred. It was all pointing people to the glory and the majesty of God. And so for the people of God, this was literally like King Nebuchadnezzar saying to the people of Jerusalem, my God, this is your God big time. And so he takes all these articles back. He also takes some of the best and brightest from the city of Jerusalem. These were some young men full of promise. They were some of the young men that were from the noble class. They had lots of great education. They were smart, and they were going places. And so he basically takes these young people back to Babylon in order to what? To brainwash them. To take them and to turn them from God followers into the followers of the Babylonian gods. To give them a new language, to give them new names, to totally change them, and to take advantage of their smarts and their abilities to now serve a new king. And so that's what's happening to these young men. Among the characters in the story, there is Daniel. There's all, of course, of which the book is named after. And there are his three friends, Mishael, Hananiah, and Azariah. They are referred to in the book of Daniel as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's hard to even imagine how these young teenagers, what the chaos must have been like in their lives, right? Overnight, they are taken to a brand new country. They have to learn a new language. They are put into an educational system. Before they were they were at Jerusalem High and they're studying the Holy Scriptures. And now they're moved to Babylon High, where they are studying the occult. And they are studying the gods of the Babylonians. Into this time also, they were given new names. And once again, this is not that big a deal when we think about being given a new name. So what? They want to give me a new name. Because in our culture, like when my wife and I had our kids, we didn't name them family names. We didn't go through a dictionary and find out the definitions or meanings of different names. We just went to a baby book and we said, that's a cool name. We would like to call our children by that name as they grow up. And so that's how we pick the names. But in the Hebrew culture, names meant identity. And so a child would literally grow into the identity of his name throughout the years. And so to take their names and change their names was a huge deal. Once again, a slap in the face. It says, you're a loser, and you're going to become someone new in Babylon. And so that's why he assigned each of them a new name. So Daniel, his name literally means God is my judge. And they changed it, the king changed it to Belteshazzar, which means Bel, or the Babylonian god Bel, is my protector. They changed Mishael, whose name meant in Hebrew, who is like our God. They changed his name to Meshach. I belong to the goddess Shak. Changed the name of Hananiah, which means my God is gracious, to Shadrach, which means my inspiration is the sun god of Babylon. Azariah, whose name in Hebrew meant God is my helper, was changed to Abednego, which means servant of Nebo, which was once again another Babylonian god. Now I thought, well, what's my name mean? So I looked it up. You ought to go do that. Just check out and see if your name has any meaning. My name literally means spear warrior. I thought that is such a cool meaning for my name. So, but once again, to steal these boys' names and give them new names was to steal a part of who they were, to steal a part of their identity. And on top of all of that, and I'm reading between the lines here, so don't go emailing me like, that's not in the Bible, because it doesn't specifically spell this out. But I'm on good authority that this probably happened. So when you read about this guy in chapter 1, I'm just going to kind of tell the story instead of reading the whole chapter, but I do want you to go read chapters 1 and 2 this week as a part of your reading for this week. But there's this guy in chapter 1 by the name of Ashpenaz. He was considered the chief of the court officials. That's the rendering of it in English. The rendering of it in the original language, he was chief of the eunuchs. You see, it was common practice in those days for a king, if he was going to bring some young, attractive, smart young men into his court, and they were going to be in the same court with his harem of women, wives and mistresses and all that, he wanted to make sure he protected his harem. So when they would bring these young men in, they would just castrate them. What was happening to you in 11th grade? Were you castrated? Were you thrown into a whole new culture and a whole new language and taught you must worship other gods? This is the plight of these young men. And then on top of all of that, and this is where we read in chapter 1 where Daniel chooses to draw the line. It's over eating the king's food, which once again doesn't sound like a big deal. Like if I'm an exilee, I'm going to probably think I'm getting servant's food. But instead the king said, no, I'm going to feed you off of my table. You know what that meant? That meant meat. And it meant filet mignon and wine. So, you'd be all over that, right? So why does Daniel choose to draw the line over the food assigned from the king's table to them? There are a couple of reasons that could have been the case. Number one, it was believed back then that when food and wine was sacrificed to the gods, that literally people would want to eat and drink that wine and that food because it literally was like you were ingesting the spirit and the power of that God into your body. Now, the other thing that possibly could have been happening is just the king knows that the way to their heart is through their stomach. So have them live in the lap of luxury and then they will buy into the plan. But the other thing was probably, as Daniel looked at this, he was a good Hebrew kid. He knew that whatever he put into his body was a way of worshiping God. And literally the Jewish people had certain kosher dietary laws that they lived by. And it wasn't just like, oh, I got to follow the rules. This was like, this is the way I honor God. And so Daniel surmises this thing. He's like, I'm going to be at least eating 3 times a day. 3 times a day, day in, day out. And so Daniel sees the writing on the wall. He sees the overwhelming odds at which he is against. And so he brokers a deal with one of the leaders in order to eat water, to drink water and eat vegetables. Some of y'all know every year at the beginning of the year we do a 21-day Daniel fast. Some people do a 10-day Daniel fast, which is kind of reflected here, that he said, just give us 10 days, and if we're not stronger and more healthier than all the rest and fattened up good, then we can go back to the original plan. And so that's what Daniel works out. And it says at the end of chapter 1 that basically these guys are 10 times better than all of the other wise men in the king's court throughout the kingdom. It's a big deal. So you're probably asking right now, why is this so important? Some teenagers 2,500 years ago, they get taken into exile. I've never been in exile. I don't have the issues, some of the things that they had to deal with. So why is this important to me? Here's why it's important. You and I, we do live in exile. You and I swim in a sea of culture that speaks into our lives every moment of every hour of every day. You have been surrounded by culture for so long, you can't even begin to distinguish between, what is of God and what is of this kingdom, because I'm immersed in it every day of my life. There are lots of voices speaking into your life and mine. Life is full of agendas. I'm assuming some of you have understood that by now. There's a lot of agendas for you and for me. There's a marketing world that will have you believe that you are what you buy and what you own and what you wear and what you drive. We're immersed in an educational system that is an incredible system, but it comes with its biases. We're surrounded by political ideologies, whether you're on one side or the other or somewhere in the middle. The truth is, we're constantly bombarded with political ideologies. The family system and the history and the genetics in which you were born play a role in what is shaping your heart and your values and your relationships. And on top of that, we live in a fallen world that pretends to know the truth. You see, from the moment you were born and I was born, we have not lived on a neutral playing field. You see, we were created in the image of God. We have value, immense value. We are dearly loved by God, and He has a beautiful plan for our lives. But here's the truth. Not only do we have agendas and voices speaking into our lives from a fallen and broken world, we have an enemy. We have an enemy who comes to steal, kill, and destroy God's best for your life and for mine. And if the agendas of this world and an enemy coming after you and me is not enough, the truth is, we have just been through 2.5 years of history. Over 1 million Americans died in the pandemic. I was just reading statistics. That's like someone took like 4 or 5 of the worst, most tragic wars in our history, along with several of the most catastrophic events, and they don't even come close to measuring the number of people we lost to COVID. There's racial division, mass shootings, political divisions, natural disasters, global unrest with the war in Ukraine, and now, on top of it all, impending recession. This is a day of monumental upheaval and struggle. And I got to tell you, I think it's very tempting for many of us to just give in. Someone wrote an article about, the age of great resignation. I don't think it's just from jobs. I think the cumulative effect of the last 2.5 years, the isolation, some of the division within our world, some of the breakdowns in our families, the truth is, there are people walking around you who are laughing and smiling and going about their lives, and they have already resigned. They have become a statistic. And I think in all of our hearts, every morning we wake up, we don't want to become a statistic. We want to become a world changer. We want to know that God used our one and only life to make a difference in this world. Not to be the influenced, but to be the influencer. So that's why this story is so important. These teenage boys were thrown into a world that sought to brainwash them and change their identities. Do you buy into the press that we just simply give in and resign ourselves? Or do we make a difference for God? We make a difference. See, there's a kingdom that defies the climate of this world, where one can resolve to listen to the voice of the one who created you and loved you, as opposed to the other voices in your life. There is one that does not surrender to the temperature surrounding us, but affects and changes the temperature of the climate around us. One that does not disappear in Babylon and just become another statistic, but one who becomes a world changer with the help of God. Daniel and his friends could have griped and complained and resigned themselves to the hand that was dealt them. They could have just simply said, we're here. What happens in Babylon just stays in Babylon. They could have done that as well. But they chose to honor God and to claim their identity in who He said they were and not who someone else said. And so over these next 6 weeks, we're going to learn some things from these young men, these teenagers, that can help shape the way we see our lives and the way we live out our lives. So I want to give you, in the remainder of our time today, 4 things that these young men did in this first chapter that I think strongly impact how we can begin to live as world changers and not statistics to our culture and to the environment around us. Number 1, they determined their convictions. Determine your convictions. Determine your convictions. Daniel 1:8 says this, "But Daniel resolved in his heart not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way." In other words, they were intentional. They made up their mind. Here is where I draw a line. Here is where I drive in a stake. Here is a non-negotiable as I pursue the heart of God and as God pursues my heart. This is where I state clearly my conviction. This is where I take a step of faith. You're going to notice in Daniel 1, Daniel doesn't do everything. There's some things that are beyond his control. But where he can make a difference, where he can make a decision, that's where he takes a stand. You see, if you want to live like everyone else in Babylon, you can live like everyone else in Babylon. It's simple. Just go with the flow. Just continue to swim downstream where everybody else is traveling. You see, if we are going to live like no one else, then we need to live like no one else. And it's not always easy, as it wasn't easy for these young men. But they determined where they would take a step of faith, where they would draw a line. And it made a difference in their lives. And so, Daniel couldn't change where he lived. He couldn't change his new course curriculum. Notice this, he had a name change, but I didn't realize this until I was preparing this sermon. Nowhere in the book of Daniel, and we believe, most people believe, like he had a part in writing his story. Nowhere in the book of Daniel does Daniel refer to himself as Belteshazzar. Apparently, what other people call you is not most important. It's what you call yourself and who God calls you to be. And over again, Daniel refers to himself as Daniel. So he does that, but then he chooses to draw the line with the king's food. As an act of worship, as an act of holy defiance, he chooses to broker a deal with one of the chief guards and officials there. And you see, over time, Daniel knew this decision that he would make 3 times a day, at least 3 times a day. I don't know how many meals you eat, but I'm always up at the table 3 times a day, every day. He didn't do everything. He didn't take every step of faith, but he did take this one. Don't ever underestimate a small step of faith and the way in which it can change your tomorrow. See, here's the truth, and it's been said over and over again. No one really claims who actually said this at the beginning, but it's true. If you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. And many of us have just fallen for everything. And it leads to detours. It leads to a lot of hardship and pain. And it certainly doesn't take us to a place of God's best for our lives and for our families and our marriages and our futures. And so these young men didn't become a statistic. They were intentional about choosing where they would draw the line and where they would take a step. Second, don't go alone. Don't go alone. You see, I love this. Daniel he resolves to not eat the king's meat. That sounds like Daniel made that decision. But then you go a few verses later, and when Daniel's brokering the deal with the official about the vegetables and everything, he's saying us. So I don't know if that means Daniel was the oldest one. And he said, hey guys, if I'm doing this, you're doing it too. This is what God would want us to do. Or I don't know if they all just said, hey, we're bonding together. We are 4 people against a kingdom. So we got to stick together. But whatever happened, by the time the deal is actually brokered, all of them are in on the same deal. You see, if you want to be a world changer, you will never change the world if you try to do a solo act. See, isolation is never the way towards transformation. I love what John Wesley, who is the guy who started the whole movement of Methodism, he said, there is no personal holiness without social holiness. And what he meant by that is that, if you try to do the Christian faith on your own, here's what happens. You become a legend in your own mind. You have all kinds of grace because it's only you to be gracious towards. You have all kinds of forgiveness because who doesn't want to forgive themselves? We're kind of living the right path because all of a sudden we've got a narrow tunnel vision of what that looks like. But you see, if you want to really grow in your faith, who is around you that is encouraging you, praying for you? Who is around you that is there when the bottom of life drops out on you? Who is there to challenge you to experience God's best for your life? You see, when you're with other people, you have to learn to be gracious, not just to people you like, but to people you don't like. Because that's the way of Jesus. We learn about forgiveness because we actually have to forgive someone. And that hurts. And that sometimes goes so contrary to what we're feeling. You see, there's so much that we gain when we do this thing together. And there's a power in a movement when people come together to be a part of it together. Whether you're just 4 against a whole kingdom or whether you got a couple of thousand people. And so that's why we come together for corporate worship. Every time I stand in this church and I worship, I look around the room and I see you worshiping God, and I see people leaning into all that God has, and I'm inspired and I'm encouraged. That's why we base the whole core of what we do on life groups, because we want people to be in small circles around God's word where we pray for each other, encourage each other, challenge each other, hold each other accountable. See, some of the greatest shaping of our hearts will be taking the road trip together. And so who in your life is like that? You don't have to have a ton of them, but you do need to have a few who are seeking to walk in the path of Jesus, who are loving you, who are being gracious, who are teaching, and who are pouring into your life. And who are you pouring into their life? Community is important. Don't go alone. Number 3 is this: walk in humility. Yeah, that one. Some of you love number 1. Number 1 said, draw the line. I'm with you, Pastor. Let's get on it. Let's be militant. Let's charge the hill. Let's tell the whole world about how they've screwed up. And then we come to point 3, which is humility. Grace and truth. Grace and truth. You see, humility is the most underrated and disregarded heart posture when it comes to walking out the Christian faith. I think it's the absence of humility from our lives that is the one thing that ruins our witness to an unbelieving world. You see, pride in our hearts makes it all about us. But humility is different. When we're prideful, we leave the impression with the world of arrogance, judgment, and condemnation, a kind of holier than thou attitude. But humility is different. Humility is a right assessment of who you are in light of who God is. We need a whole lot more humility in this world. Here's what humility says: I am not the hero of my life. Jesus is. I didn't do anything to deserve my salvation or earn it. Jesus laid down his life. He made a way when there was no way that I could make a way. That's humility. Humility is not only that, it says, I'm a sinner saved by grace. And I stand at level ground at the foot of the cross. And not only am I saved by grace when I gave my life to Jesus, I'm saved by grace every moment of every day I depend upon that grace. I am one decision away from making a train wreck for my life, and so are you. We need him every hour. Humility says that I am a servant and not a celebrity. Jesus did not come to just simply have the admiration of the crowds and to build some kind of platform for himself. Jesus came to serve a broken and dying world. And ultimately, the scriptures say in Philippians that Jesus did not count equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. He humbled himself, and he took the form of a servant, and he laid down his life. He could have asserted his rights as Lord, but instead, he chose to make it all about you and all about me when he laid down his life at the cross. Humility. Humility says, I am not entitled to anything in this world, but I'm given everything by a God who created me and loves me. Humility says, everything that I have in life is on loan. And one day, I give it all back to its rightful owner when I breathe my last breath. Humility means everything that I have, my home, my money, my smarts or lack of it, my life, the time that I have in this world, everything that I have belongs to God. And so how I steward what God has given me is one of the greatest ways that I humble my heart before the generosity of God. C.S. Lewis put it this way. I love this definition. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. Thinking of yourself less. You see, in chapter 1 here, Daniel resolved to not eat the royal food, but you do not see him telling the chief what he needs to do. You do not see Daniel preaching or pointing the finger. He doesn't make demands. He asks for permission. And not only that, he rightly refers to himself as a servant. He understands he's not in control. And the very guy that is holding him captive, he honors. He honors. You know what else he does with a humble heart? He listens. He listens to his captor. When he tries to broker this deal, you know, the guard guy says, look, I didn't make the order. The king made the order. If I don't follow through on that order, all of our heads roll. So David listens. He values the life of a guy he disagrees with. He values the life of a guy whose gods are not his own God. He values the life of a guy who he vehemently disagrees with. And in that humility, God begins to broker a deal. And Daniel says, let's just do a test for 10 days. And if it doesn't work out, hey, we'll go back to the original plan. And so, you see, Daniel was humbling himself in that situation. It's kind of like Jesus, our model. Jesus was the most extraordinary, humble servant who ever lived. Jesus is the one who washed the feet of the dirty feet of his disciples, not any of them. Jesus consistently lived humble servanthood. Do you know how the early Christians won a Roman Empire within 300 years? Not by asserting their rights or by somehow trying to wedge their way into some political party. They won it through humility and extravagant, radical love. And the rest of the world began to pay attention. And over 300 years, they won the Roman Empire over to Christianity. Humility. And then finally, remember where your hope lies. Remember where your hope lies. How did Daniel and his friends get up every morning over the course of a lifetime in captivity? Think about it. They were probably taken there sometime in their mid-teenage years, and they spent their entire life in captivity. How do you wake up every morning in captivity? How do you wake up every morning submersed in a land of foreign gods and the occult? How do you wake up every morning with people that you vehemently disagree with? How do you wake up every morning and be a light of God in that dark world? Here's why. They knew where their hope was. You see, when Daniel's writing this, maybe he's 70, 80 years old, when he's looking back over his life and he's looking back over what happened to him, notice what you'll see all through the book of Daniel. All through the book of Daniel, he's looking back and seeing the hand of God at work in captivity, in exile, in a day of darkness and hopelessness. He keeps seeing the hand of God show up. In chapter 1, verse 2, he says, the Lord delivered the king of Israel into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. God was still in control and on the throne, even when his people were experiencing defeat. Chapter 1, verse 9, God caused the chief official. God caused the chief official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. Chapter 1, verse 17, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning for Daniel and his friends, and the king found them 10 times better than all the wise men in the kingdom. You see, they knew where their hope was. And I know it's easy sometimes to live in the kind of day we live in and begin to believe that it's hopeless. And we just need to resign to the hopelessness of those around us. We just need to become a statistic in the land of Babylon. God did not create you for that. And I know Jesus didn't lay down his life on the cross and walk out of a grave 3 days later for us to become a statistic. By the power of his Spirit, you can become a world changer. But if your hope is in anything else but Jesus, everything else will fall. And some of you have experienced over the last 2.5 years. Your hope was in your career, gone. Your hope was in your wealth, gone. Your hope was in your health, gone. Your hope was in a friend or a family member that you loved and cared about, and everything was based on them. And now they're gone. The only anchor of hope we have is in the one who walked out of the grave. And because he lives, you can live also. The promise of God is, I will never leave you or forsake you. And we're on the other side of the resurrection. Daniel looked at that day from afar. He saw that day from afar, but he lived before the resurrection. We live after the fact. We live in the victory of what Jesus did on our behalf. And so today, he calls us to be world changers, not statistics. And so I want to ask you a few questions as we finish. Where do you draw a line in your life today? Where do you take a step of faith in your life today that changes the trajectory of your life? What is that for you? Are you in community? Is there someone in your life that's pouring into you? Are you pouring into someone else? Is there someone that's there for you, praying for you, encouraging you, holding you accountable and seeking the best of God for your life? We can't do this alone. Are you asking God for a greater and more humble heart? We will never reach a world which we feel like we're better than. You will never reach a lost and unbelieving world that you don't love. You will never reach a lost and broken world that you are not listening to the hurt and the pain in order to bring the truth of God into those relationships. So, ask God, God, give me a humble heart. Sometimes the road to that is not easy. It'll get bad before it gets better. But the only way we reach a broken world is through humility, as Jesus modeled for us. And then finally, where's your hope? And I pray today that you have a relationship with Jesus, that your hope is in him, because nothing will separate you from the love of God in Christ Jesus. And I pray today that if you don't have a relationship with him, that you would choose today to place your trust in him as Lord and Savior. Let's not become statistics. Let's not go on decades-long detours. Let's become world changers. Let's look back on our generation and say, we made some decisions in this hour of history that God used to change the world, change this community, change our families. Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you. We thank you that we do not have to just simply survive in this world. That by the power of your Spirit, by the fact that Jesus walked out of the grave, God, we can live and make a difference. We can wake up every day of our lives, in the good times and in the bad times, in the times of health and in the times of illness. We can wake up every day in the times of victory and in the times of loss. We can wake up every day with hope. We can wake up every day and be a light in a dark world. God, may it be said of history that in this hour we stepped up, we stepped out, we surrendered our lives with humility, and we placed our hope in the only one for whom we can find hope. And we help change the world. We pray this in the strong and mighty name of Jesus. And everybody said, amen.